Good morning, everyone. All right, you had me out late last night and up early. Can you give me a bigger good morning than that, for crying out loud? You owe me one here. Come on. Thank you. Nah, not for me. Listen, it really is my pleasure and honor to be here, and I do want to thank you all for not just inviting me here this morning, because this is a pretty exciting gathering, but also for the really terrific welcome that I've been given at Harvard throughout. And it's just been amazing how quickly you have filled my time in a time of need. It's not that you gave me more money to do a lot, it's just that you kept me stop thinking about DC every once in a while, which is very helpful at this point in time. So I'm really incredibly impressed what I am seeing across the campuses, and in fact what I'm learning myself. It's really quite amazing. You know, I met with some of your students, Dr. Ashish, last night at HGHI, and they asked me such incredibly probing and thoughtful questions. It was incredibly annoying that I hadn't thought about many of them, and all the time I've been thinking about this stuff. But it is really clear to me that you are really preparing this next generation to actually fight the good fight, as my father would say, if they decide to venture into the fact-free zone that we call the Beltway. But I'm hoping that there'll be, opportunities for them out of the gate that the rest of us struggle to try to identify. And I do think that as difficult as it is today, there is a foundation of knowledge about issues that can be built on, and that you're training the folks to be able to do it. So I can't thank you enough for all of the work that's going on. And it also turns out that I'm speaking this Sunday, so I have to do many speeches so that I don't bore the same people who go to the same meetings, at the Planetary Health Alliance meeting. And so it's just incredibly honored to speak, not just here but there. But that was the first time in years that when I was asked to speak, I actually had to do research on the subject matter. Where are my peeps when you need them? I'm telling you. But it's not just that. It's you're thinking about things at levels that I have never, in scales I have never thought about before, that are perhaps the most compelling cases we're going to be able to draw as to how our world is changing, and what adaptation really looks like, and what do we have to prepare ourselves in the health world to be able to deal with this, and who is missing from all these conversations all these times? The health world. And so it is really exciting to see all this happening, and to be able to read about all the new multidisciplinary efforts, because I do love working in government, but the one thing I've always hated is bureaucracy. And that's kind of saying I love a culture, I hate their language. I don't mean it like that, but the bureaucracy tends to focus us in ways that are far too narrow, that forget how things leak into one another, and how important it is for us to remember that people aren't broken up into those bureaucracies. They kind of want it all at the same time and expect us to be thinking in an interdisciplinary way. So it's really great. Between HGHI and PHA, I feel like I'm a kid in a candy store looking at things that I've never thought of before in ways that I think could be extraordinarily impactful for how we deal with issues like climate change, obviously, but beyond. So, but when I was reading it, it reminded me of a book that I read called Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. I'm sure folks, if they think back, actually read that book. And I really read it because, you may not know it, but I'm a wannabe social anthropologist. That's what I took as my undergraduate degree, but I'm not pursuing it because there actually were no jobs at that point in time advertising for social anthropologists. And I had to eat, so there was a bit of a conflict there. And I've always really wanted to know about what caused the Mayan civilization's collapse. So I jumped on that book when I saw it, and I tracked it down to see if there's any interesting tidbits that we could learn from this book. Now, Jared Diamond makes the case, if you haven't read it, that the Mayan population really collapsed because it outstripped its resources, its natural resources. It talked about destroying the soil from poor farming and land management practices that led to basically a cyclical drought that aggravated the situation, that led to internal strife and all kinds of problems. So it really was a huge systemic planetary problem for them, if you will. But they said, this is what Diamond says about the Mayan leaders that failed to solve the problem they faced. They said, their attention was evidently focused on their short-term concerns of enriching themselves, waging wars, erecting monuments, competing with each other, and extracting enough food from the presents to support all those activities. Does this sound familiar to anybody? I was reading that tax thing last night. Didn't take long. It was only a page, a couple of double-spaced stuff. But anyways, he talks about the issues of non-sustainability, and he starts documenting them, calling them time bombs for our society and the world over the next 50 years. And he says the only question is whether they'll become resolved in a pleasant way of our own choice or in unpleasant ways of our choice, such as warfare, genocide, starvation, disease, epidemics, and collapses of society. It's a great discussion at 9:15 in the morning, isn't it? But he says to succeed, we need to have the courage to practice long-term and bold, courageous thinking versus narrow-minded, short-term thinking. That's actually what we're trying to embrace. It is very interesting for me to read this and think about the work that we have been doing for so many decades, trying to get people in a political system where leadership lasts about 4 years, 8 if you're unlucky or lucky, depending upon what you like, and have them think about something that we can't really say every day is about today. This was 20 years ago. These are impacts we're feeling today, but we knew they were coming. And to have them figure out how to have the courage of leadership that says that, although I don't know the solutions, I'm going to start acting. And I'm going to start investing in those long-term solutions. Now, I think we got to that point. But I think we're in for 4 years of potential significant backsliding. But since it's early in the morning, I'm not going to leave you with a hopeless message. So let's walk through these issues one at a time. And because I want you to understand that I am really not a social anthropologist. It's just very handy when you work in government and walk the halls of Congress to know what primitive societies actually do. But I am at heart a public health person. That's where I spent all of my life. And the annoying thing is I work for agencies called the environmental agencies, but that's exactly what we are. Our stock and trade is how well we can protect public health. Even though I'm called the Environmental Protection Agency, I am in the people protection business. I worry about their health, and I worry about the natural resources that are critical to providing them clean water, clean air, and healthy land. That's what my life has been dedicated towards. And so while these names are unsatisfying, you got to understand the breadth of what we do, and many do not. And so it's been an interesting walk through. But let's talk about climate change and health in particular, because I think I need to learn lessons from you just as much as you need to hear from me. But I do think it's helpful for you to understand how climate science has, through a number of twists and turns, actually made its way into climate actions, both at the local and state level as well as at the federal level over the past decades, and especially in the last 8 years. Because what I think people are forgetting is the federal government was pretty much out of the picture until the last 8 years. And it only came into the picture because you had tremendous actions at the state and local and regional level in this country, and actions in the courts to force the federal government to stand up. So I think we might have all gotten a little complacent over the last 8 years hearing about climate a lot, but it was a long slog before we got here. And it is a long slog between here and finding the solutions that science tells us we need to find. So we can't start getting bogged down in what happens this year, next year, or the following year. We are on a long journey together, and if you become hopeless, you will never be able to communicate to anybody to join a hopeless task. So that's my first thing, is to tell you, get the mopes off your face, pull up your big boy pants. We are moving forward no matter what anybody says, and when the federal government doesn't act, that doesn't mean the United States of America doesn't, right? This is where we are. I have to tell you something, in my experience in the environment, good things never happen at the federal level. Only when they're forced to happen because every community has started to understand that they are at risk and they do work themselves. Then it leaks up when the communities get annoying enough, the state government does something. When the state governments get annoying and you've got patchwork of regulations and interests, then everybody goes, oh, maybe we need to get the federal government engaged, but don't do anything. You know, just get engaged, and it takes a long time. So if you're concerned that you have to go back to your local communities and start acting again because you don't have the federal government stepping up, well, I'm not apologizing for that. There is waffling every time there's a change in administration. And what I'll tell you is that I fully recognize that this administration is unlike any other, at least in my history. It doesn't mean that we can't use the same kind of strategies we used before when the federal government was absent. We use exactly the same. And the interesting thing about today is that it has almost sparked an understanding again that democracy isn't about Washington, D.C. Democracy is about you and me. It's about our core values. And if people in Washington aren't expressing our core values the way we think they should, then we have to do it ourselves. And we have to remind them about what the United States of America stands for, and that we have learned a lot and we're not going to become ignorant today. We've gone too far in our understanding of climate and the threat it poses and the solutions that are available to us to ever pretend they don't exist. And so it is not going to change the United States of America or our commitment to have folks in Washington denying the science and pretending as if we can turn the clock back to look at jobs that have been deteriorating for 40 years that no longer fit the future of where we need to be, as if those are the jobs of the future. We know they're not. Let's get over it. Let's just move forward, and let's get everybody engaged, especially those that are disadvantaged in any transition. That's what we do for one another. That's what we have to do here. So let's talk about the fact that states took a lot of action and local communities took action way back when, because we need to reduplicate this effort again. Not think anew that we're all sitting here and it's got nothing to do but mope, right? Well, I don't know where you were at 20 or 30 years, but I was talking about climate change, right? Even when I was in this little town of Canton and Stoughton, you could see things, you could read stuff, you knew that things were in the offing. But when we were in Massachusetts, we didn't sit still. I got a climate change plan signed by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts. So don't tell me you can't get stuff done, all right? He signed it at an event that we unfolded. Now, did he fully embrace climate change? Sort of not. Change, sort of not. Now he does. All right, it took him a little while longer. But these are things you have to deal with when you're dealing with politicians. Right? This is it. But don't let it discourage you. If he couldn't fully embrace it, he fully embraced every action in that plan, because guess what? Taking action on climate change is a fiscally responsible thing to do. And if all you care is fiscally responsible, I'll take it now, right? This is what we have to look at. I don't care why you like the action, just do it, and we'll all be better off. Then we moved to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. We did that because we were already suing the federal government, Massachusetts versus EPA, to understand that greenhouse gases were regulated under the Clean Air Act, and they were pretending as if they weren't. Okay, so we knew they were a pollutant under the Clean Air Act, but it took 6 years to get there, and we weren't going to sit around and wait. We wanted to test whether you could have a cap-and-trade program among the states. It certainly was not the most restrictive program. It's gotten more restrictive over time, but it was set up as a model. What can we do that potentially could set a path forward for the federal government? Because at that point in time, that was the big solution. Had to be a cap-and-trade program in Washington. And we actually found a way to design it in a way that actually helped with an early energy transition in New England and some of the mid-Atlantic states in ways that has significantly benefited our ability to have reliable energy systems here, that have put us on the forefront. And what it did also was invest so heavily in energy efficiency because we were so invested in energy efficiency that we would not sign it unless part of the allowances went towards supporting energy efficiency. And it actually developed programs that supported demand reduction that was essential to keeping the cost of that program down. And it created jobs. It paid money into the revenues of the states that they could then spend in ways that people could feel it and taste it and touch it. They didn't know where the money was coming from, but they enjoyed it. And so we had an ability to say at the federal level, there is absolutely no reason why you can't design a cap and trade program. It should work. So when the President Obama came in, I keep saying the president, you'll have to forgive me. I talk about EPA, it's like it's mine. I cannot divorce myself that quickly. I'm trying, it's a hard separation. I feel like I've left my children to bad parents. No, I shouldn't say that. So we really have to, I have to try to say this. The former president, when we handed over the reins to him, his first term was all about looking at cap and trade because there was a lot of momentum. Do you remember the Waxman-Markey bill? It just failed in the Senate by a couple of votes, but that's where the emphasis was placed. But he didn't simply rely on that. By that point in time, the courts had acted, and we had an ability at EPA to actually look at carbon as a pollutant and for the first time regulated under the Clean Air Act. We did that through the light-duty vehicle standards. Now, our leverage here, if you're thinking politics, folks, if your leverage here is that you need to take action on climate and you have auto manufacturers that are going down the tubes unless the federal government bails them out, it's a leverage point to get them to stand up on a stage with you and say, yes, I'm not producing vehicles that the people that I'm trying to sell to actually want to buy, and it's time to do that. And so we leveraged two rules out of that dynamic that actually will nearly double the fuel economy by 2025. We had the automakers standing with us. That's called good government. And guess what? They returned all the money. We never had to worry about the bailout that was given to them that everybody thought was a handout. They agreed to sell cars that people wanted to buy, and they are healthier as an industry than they have been in decades. No pain, lots of gain. That's how you do business in government. That's how you tell people to stop being afraid of a problem because you can't figure out a solution. Smart people get good solutions on the table that don't just benefit the environment but benefit the underlying economy, because when it becomes a market driver, you don't need to regulate it anymore. It moves in, it takes hold, and it happens. Now, the next thing that we did was to start thinking about the messaging. Because as Dean Williams indicated, I have trouble with scientists and their messaging. Let me just put it in a very frank way. You suck at it when you're talking to the general public. You're getting better. I don't mean it as a criticism. I'm really bad, as you can tell, talking to scientists, and I make no apology for that. The challenge is you do start with all of your uncertainties when you're trying to get somebody in the community to think 20 years ahead, when you won't tell them that anything that's happening today is actually a climate impact. But we're looking at the future, and it's a series of trends over 40 years, not last week. Okay, this is what you do. And then you say, you know, it's very likely to be happening. Bah! You just lost 95% of the people there who really don't like to gamble. Well, some do, some don't. So, and then you make the overwhelmingly interesting comment by talking about how the science is evolving. Okay, you just lost the other 5% who likes to gamble because they don't like the rules to change, right? So you've told them you can't say anything is a climate impact that's already happening. You can't tell them that it's for sure happening because you really don't know. That's what you just said. And you're telling them that over time, maybe next week, I was mistaken. That's really not happening. You really need to speak in different language because that, while to you, a very likely is the language of science that says this is happening. And if you have any doubt, look at the risk. Because no moron would go with 95% and do nothing if the risk was the health of the planet and the future of your children, right? But you got to be able to say it. You've got to be able to speak it. And what happened with climate was also the distinct problem that it was considered to be an environmental issue. I have said since day one, this is no way an environmental issue. This was the choice of using fossil fuel to actually serve as our energy supply. I don't know any environmental agency that made that choice. And by the way, women in the audience, it was man-made greenhouse gases that are causing this problem. If they intentionally kept us barefoot and pregnant while all these decisions were made, we are not owning this, certainly not until they give us equal pay for equal work. That's it. That's my bottom line. So we started looking at how do we message this differently? How do we talk about it? So we started with this little climate indicators report, which is cute. It's a handy-dandy, the 10 biggest things you want to think about. It was a way to just try to make it relatable to people. We got a little bit more clever when we did something called climate impacts and risk assessment. You know, this is a little bit more clever because it expanded the audience. It talked more specifically what it means for our ocean resources so that our fisheries industry, our oyster industry, could see its direct impact on there. It talked about laborers working outside and what changes in heat would actually mean for them. It talked about infrastructure, like our roads and bridges and what it means for that. But that's as far as it went. The things you're talking about so far are so far above the kind of thinking that we've already put to this that engage people. But the difficulty of all this, after we actually finally said we don't have anything on health, we finally did something on health directly because to me, this is a public health threat. We actually put something together that talks about it, but it limited itself to talking about the fact that it's going to exacerbate things that are already happening or bring them to different places. It really didn't raise any big, large, systemic problem on public health that would have engaged the public health community. And the last people to the table in climate change is the public health community, because they viewed it as an environmental problem, just the same way that the health community views public health. It's kind of an annoying little nit. We like all that treatment money. Don't give us stuff that prevents the disease in the first place, right? Okay, I could talk to you forever about that. Separate subject. So we actually, in the second term, did something different. We actually knew that our messages were weak. We knew we were only reaching certain people. And I made it very clear to the President of the United States when I took on this job that I would go all out on climate. In fact, I didn't want the job unless I could. And he said, I don't want you to do it unless you do. It was a marriage made in heaven. But we knew that this could not be the lift of the EPA. It could not be the lift of the EPA. And when he went and unveiled his climate action plan right before I was actually confirmed, how annoying was it to watch it on TV? Right before I was confirmed, he did not talk about climate change as an environmental problem. He never even used the word environment, I don't think. He talked about it as a public health problem. He talked it as an economic problem. He talked about it as a national security problem. And he also talked about it as an opportunity for United States leadership. He talked about clean energy as the future of our economy, not a fix for climate change. He tried to do the balancing act, I think, and did it beautifully, of how you engage people, but don't scare them away at the same time. Every human being, when you tell them they're going to get hit over the head and potentially die, is going to tuck their head in the sand as far as they can and never look up. You have to present it not just as a problem, but solutions. And by that time, we had spent, this president had spent so much money, the recovery money, looking at clean energy and investing in that, that we had some solutions to offer. Those solutions were on the cusp of becoming marketable. And guess what? That's not going away. They are marketable. It is fiscally responsible to choose renewable energy and energy efficiency. Now, you won't hear red states put up their hand and say, governors saying, I'm all for climate change, but damn, they're investing in renewables and energy efficiency because it's fiscally good. Now, those technologies are not going to get us where science tells us, but they are going to start a momentum. And they have already started a momentum in the United States in the clean energy train left the station. It's not going back, and it doesn't matter what any one person, including the President of the United States, says. Period. Full stop. That is going to continue. It's just too cheap. The incredible progress that we have made in renewable energy is just amazing. We are talking in the United States, hold on, I got a little facts and figures here because it's always good to do that. The average cost of wind from 2009 to 15, when we really started investing in it, reduced by 61%. In solar, it's 81%. In the United States, we have 2.5 million people that are actually employed in the field of clean energy. We have 1.9 million more that are employed in energy efficiency programs. We are talking about jobs today in the future that dwarf any jobs that this president has talked about so far. So we need to embrace that. We need to understand that this is our future. And this is a bipartisan effort to continue with that because it is jobs. It is saving money. It's what we need to do, not just to protect ourselves from this environmental degradation, but it's what we need to do to protect ourselves from public health exposures that are going to be damaging to us and our kids, from economic downturns that you can identify just what they cost, as well as estimate what those additional burdens are going to be in the future, and the risks and the costs far outweigh anything that we will ever need to spend on the solutions. And so it's important, but it's also important to know that at the same time as we were doubling down on looking at this as a much more broad-based effort to reach everybody at local level and state level to start engaging and find a place in this climate action, we realized that those folks who don't want climate change to be acknowledged, who have obviously an interest in fossil fuel extending their life, they doubled down as well. They're the ones that began to pick up on the science messages and to start discrediting it. They're the ones that started investing in working with Congress to do rules that will actually shut science up if they actually go through. Those are the things we need to pay attention to, because the latest investment of the Koch brothers is to make sure that all the success that we have had at EPA and elsewhere, reaching the very communities that are most vulnerable and getting them active and engaged in understanding issues of climate, are the very communities that their money is being targeted at now, so they can show that solar is an elitist plot by liberals that's going to take away jobs in African American communities. That's what they're doing today. So we have a concerted effort that has not waned and has had a little life breathed into them with this president that we need to be conscious of. So while I want you to be hopeful, I have to have you be much more diligent. I have to ask scientists who don't want to get into the political fray to explain to them that your only way of not being political is to get in the fray. Because what these bills do is make your world political. They do things like saying, I can't use horrible science to understand the health impacts of particulate matter because it's from Harvard University and the American Cancer Society. Who would want those dregs to do science that we paid attention to? They're actually saying this, that these studies that we have been relying on for decades are not ever going to be able to be considered because you can't duplicate them because we don't have all the raw data, which includes protected health information. And unless that's fully exposed, we can't possibly agree. The peer review process that we follow in the United States of America isn't good enough anymore for EPA. They're also saying, our peer reviewers, if you took any money from EPA over the past 3 or 5 years as a scientist, which we spend lots of little dollars, basically getting science to be tweaked so it's usable for policies and regulatory purposes at EPA, if you do that, you can no longer sit on a peer review panel. You are excluded. However, industry, even if that industry rep is involved in the very issue that you are peer reviewing, they have a right to sit on a peer review panel now, even if they are inherently conflicted by what they're doing. This is what's being said, folks. This undermines not just EPA, but eventually will undermine science and how we do it. Just so it's not good enough anymore to ignore inconvenient science. We have to simply not do it anymore. What do you think all these budget cuts are all about? Do you really think it's fiscally responsible to do this? And this is why we've decided that in order to build up the military, let's stop doing science and research as we know it. It is not simply that easy. You have to understand that your world is getting politicized. We cannot let science and politics mix. We have to have science underpinning our policies, but frankly, they're one piece. They're not the only thing we think about because we have laws that we work within as well. We have people that we need to explain the need for and articulate it, or no matter what the law and science says, you're going to fail. This is my world that I live in, and it's about engagement. It's about public process. It's about doing these things right so that everybody can get engaged and active. So as much as you're reluctant to get out and march or hold signs or stick your head up or talk about things other than explicit research, if you do not, in this day and age, where so much money has been spent to discredit EPA and others who can speak to the science but are no longer trusted, then who is going to speak to keep science out of the politics and keep the politics out of science? You have to stop being comfortable in ivory towers, and you've got to start speaking more clearly and articulately, and you have to act as a public citizen who's well-informed. That's all I want. I don't want you to complain about this administration. I simply want you to talk as one human being to another about what the science tells you and what you want to have done to protect your children and your children's future. That's all I care about. If it's important to you, it should be important to the person next to you who doesn't know what you know. They're not interested in asking you the likelihood. They simply want you to know as you as a parent, as an individual, is this something I need to worry about? And they'll care what you have to say. And right now, as hard as it is for me to say this, EPA is not the credible person to speak anymore on these issues. We are too political. We have been made political by folks who want to discredit us. So we're stuck. You're it. Tag. But I have to tell you that I want you to understand a couple of things, and because I'm going to talk for 5 more minutes, and then we have plenty of time for questions. I think we do. Didn't I say? Didn't you give me till 10:10? All right. I'm going to talk for 5 more minutes because I think that people who don't understand and don't work in government actually think executive orders do something. I just want to be very clear about a couple of things that are happening. We, through the second term of the Obama administration, took some incredible steps forward, frankly, over the 8 years, to protect clean air and water. Now, this administration is claiming that that's our core work, as if climate change has no impact on clean air and clean water. Rather baffling distinction, I think. But I want you to understand that this administration is showing no distinction between climate actions and those actions that we took that are absolutely vital frontline issues to protect clean air and clean water today, okay? You have to understand that. They are looking at developing a budget that is cutting EPA by 1/3, all of our science and our scientists in half. That's reducing money that goes to states. So if they're telling you, if you're listening to them saying, well, we're just going to let the states do it, which in New England is frightening because they've been doing it to us for a long time from other states. Yeah, it is absolutely no validity to saying we're going to be good to the states and get rid of EPA. They're taking a 45% cut in the money that EPA gives to states. We are looking at devastating blows to EPA so that we can make sure that EPA can't do the science and can't do the work that it was doing in outreach and engagement to explain what that science means so that the people in the United States get to speak with a voice to its leadership. And so it is the one concerning thing about how we protect that, and I think we all need to worry about it. But I do have to tell you and remind you that in the history of mankind, Congress has never paid a hoot of attention to the president's budget. It's kind of sad. When you like the budget, you kind of wish they would. When you don't, it's kind of a gift from heaven, right? This is just the president's proposal. There is a long time between here and there. And Reagan proposed similar types of cut to the agency, and the people in the United States spoke, and he got none of that done because he realized that the people in the United States actually like clean air and clean water. And in this country today, the poll shows it. We just had a big release from Harvard by Bob Blendon and others looking at this, completely neutral. People like EPA, they like what we're doing, and they're going to stand up. And we're seeing from Yale studies that have recently come out that 70% of the people in the United States don't just like EPA. They actually are beginning to understand climate change, and they're not backing off. They want leadership and they want action. So no matter what this president said, we have people in a very different place that should bring us hope that they're going to stand up and pay attention. And the great thing about all the attacks that this administration has caused is the fact that we now understand that we're in a participatory democracy again. It's not just about getting people out to vote every 4 years. If that's your idea of being a responsible citizen, then I'm personally going to slap you upside your head. Not hard, just a little bit. Because you have to speak, you have to get active. And this is what people are beginning to see. And I expect young people will take this charge. And what we had it in the 50s and 60s, when Boston Harbor was so polluted you couldn't swim in it or boat in it, when we had smokestacks spewing, we knew we were damaging the earth. Well, honey, scientists tell us we still are, even though you can't see it. Because pollution that you can't see can still kill you. And it's still doing that every day. So this is our opportunity to speak. And science is the foundation of all of that. Now, so that's the budget. Now, all these executive orders. We did a lot of rules on climate change. Let me mention them to you. We talked about the light-duty vehicle rule. Heavy-duty vehicles, we got at the cars and trucks, big source of greenhouse gas emissions. We got at, and this wasn't done as a climate rule, but it set a stage for it, the mercury and air toxic standard, which looked for the first time 20 years in arrears, 30 years by some. 20 years in arrears, we finally set standards on utilities in terms of emitting mercury into the atmosphere, which is a big deal for kids, big deal for pregnant women. And it's already showing signs that that the world has changed because this had a compliance window that's already passed. But the one thing this did as well is to tell all those dirty facilities that if your facility isn't running and worthy of investment to put on modern pollution controls, you have a time limit to make that decision. And as a result, many of those old clunkers, they were so old, so outdated, that they weren't worth investing, so they weren't worth running, so we no longer have to face those. And so when you get to the Clean Power Plan, which we're regulating carbon, we know we're continuing to draw those other air toxics out of the system. And we're going to be able to make progress without having to say that we're the ones controlling the energy market. It was done because it's about pollution, not us determining energy and who wins and who loses. So we did the Clean Power Plan. We did methane rules on oil and gas. We did methane rules on landfills. So we have made significant progress. And yes, you have seen many executive orders that have been signed that looks like in the sweep of a pen, the executive order gets held up. This is my imitation of Trump. It's not as exciting as most people's. We actually have seen those executive orders out there, but you have to understand that a final rule is done in a way that there is a record created. There is a process it took. We developed these rules in a way that was legally sound, based on science, fully transparent. The Clean Power Plan, I started those discussions 4 to 5 years ago. 4 to 5 years ago, before we even put a proposal out, because I know what it takes to do big things and make them happen. And so we designed it right. You cannot undo a rule. An executive order doesn't trump a rule. To get it done, you need to go through a transparent rulemaking process, and that's where you guys come in. They can hear from the people here. They're going to have to figure out how to ask the same people that created a scientifically and legally solid record to explain why that record is now deficient. On the basis of what? We're going to now tell the courts that, oh, never mind this climate science, you got to just skip that right over it. It's just not going to work, folks. And I know what it takes to put those rules together. They ain't got it. So stop dwelling that all these things have gone away. They have not. We are beginning a battle, and I fully expect it will be a multi-year battle, and the courts will tie it up for a considerable time, and that we will be back perhaps where we started, and that's disappointing, but we have not lost. They have just set a stage for a battle in a different location, and if we're not prepared to take this up, we've got an awfully long journey that we're getting too tired for right now. Okay? So let's just get ourselves engaged. And let's remember that I know that, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that President Obama worked very hard to do this domestic work with the understanding that it would trigger international work. He wanted an agreement in Paris that was solid, that had a level of accountability, that had every country stepping up, that was going to change as we understood the science, so that we would be paying attention, meeting goals, making them more strict, making the kind of agreement stick that would have everybody engaged and everybody involved, because that's what climate demands. It was probably the proudest moment of my life when that Paris Agreement went through, because what we did made that happen. And President Obama, I will tell you, spent huge amounts of his time individually making sure that when we got to Paris, it wasn't its normal debate and crapshoot. It was already a done deal between us and China. There were already huge conversations with India as well, so that we knew we had fertile ground for an agreement that mattered to pass. This country should not walk away from the Paris Agreement. And the only good thing I can point to right now is that the president hasn't signaled one way or another. There's a debate, and that debate is being lodged by the business community. They're the ones stepping up, because businesses today see the future. They have too much at risk like the rest of us. It's called their business if they don't understand the economic implications of climate change and start adjusting to that. They don't want to work in a country that denies it. They want to work in a country that helps them work through the economic vulnerabilities in a way that makes sense. that understands the risk and embraces it in the way we have always done. And the biggest message of this president has been that the country that figures out how to lead in clean energy is going to be the leader of the free world moving forward. And it had better be us. And to have any suggestion that we would cede our leadership to China should be an outrage to everyone in this country. And so I'm hoping that through the business community and others that we're going to stick it out, because we have come too far and too fast. But if we're not, anyone that comes from another country, I want you to go back and say, even if the United States doesn't stick with Paris, the United States of America isn't just its president. It is all of us. The clean energy trains left the station. We are still going to achieve our 2025 goals. There is a pathway forward, and we are going to get there. So even if we are still going to be committed as individuals, as communities, as states, as citizens of this country, as parents, we can't be anywhere other than that. So I want you to, again, remember that we are in a difficult time, and I know that there's so many things to worry about that you wake up in the morning wondering what's the tweet of today, right? But we have to realize that the one great thing about a democracy is that it's of, by, and for the people. That's us. As long as we make our voices known and as long as we talk about the core values we care about, we will win in any long-term fight. And if there's anything that all of us know, it's climate is a long-term fight. It's not one round at a time, and we're going to be there for the long haul. So thanks very much, and let's do some questions.
So we were pretty excited when we found out that we were going to have Gina McCarthy come speak. I had no idea. I had no idea. One more round of applause, please.
Thank you. That's so sweet. All right, everybody. Oh, stop. I love you guys. Thank you. Means a lot. I'm eloquent now that nobody's listening. It's great, isn't it? All right. Thank you.
Let's take about 10 minutes and let's do some questions. Then we'll take a break and we'll let you go on. But Reiner.
Wook, 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 wook. Wookie.
Well, Ms. McCarthy, I am so admiring this country's civil organization and the legal court, the courts, and all these movements which you alluded to. This is really the hour of the citizen.
Yes.
But let's assume the worst, and Mr. Trump wants to pull out of Paris, or I shudder to think out of the UNFCCC. What legal barriers are in front of him?
Yeah.
He can't do this like this with a presidential executive order, I understand.
It's a little challenging in that regard because the Paris Agreement was entered into because of existing laws allows us to do that. It didn't go through a Senate ratification in any way. But I think one of the things that just you need to remember is that I love the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, but I also love AB 32 and its new rendition in California. Let's remember that California is the 5th largest economy in the world. They are under a multi-sector cap-and-trade program that is working very well and that actually has some clever ways of addressing the equity issues that climate action raises. So no matter what happens with Paris, you're going to see Jerry Brown there, and you're going to see them doing more, and you're going to see other governors, and you're going to see our business community. If you look at who has consistently been at every COP ready to play, it's been the states. So the only thing I would ask you to think about is in the United States, the market for clean energy is moving where it's moving. And so we are not going to lose a lot, but it is embarrassing to have that type of position taken by this country. And we'll see whether the president actually listens to the business interests that are speaking to him and those that understand that this country will lose economically and from a leadership perspective if we pull out of Paris. And there's got to be, it's really fun to at least not see them debating it. I have not seen that with anything. Seriously, there's quite a debate. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, please, why don't you do it? I don't need to.
So, the president's budget isn't final, but CDC already canceled their climate change conference, and they're considering ending the climate change grant to states. So what's the plan B for funding state-based climate change grants? Can groups like the Association of State Territorial Health help with that, implementing that plan B?
Well, and, you know, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out is exactly the question that you're asking. Because in case you don't know what the budget process actually is, the president puts in a budget, but then they start with their own budget. But the challenge we have is exactly what you're saying, which is that the agencies are acting as if that budget was real. And they're trying to realign their personnel to accommodate that. I was really heartbroken when they actually took EPA's Climate Adaptation Office and they basically told them in 10 days you're down. What's wrong with climate adaptation? Is anybody arguing that the climate isn't changing now? Don't we want to help communities to actually adapt and be resilient? So it is a disturbing trend that we are seeing, and there's no question that we have big problems if they start acting as if they cannot give money that's been allocated by Congress for those specific tasks. I have a whole, you know, it's just amazing what's going on because we have a whole slew, I love that word, slew, of voluntary programs that have done remarkable work to engage people and to actually reduce greenhouse gases, like the Energy Star program. We've got the Safer Choice program for no toxic household products, things that you allow people to vote with their own purchases, you know, to show the right thing. And they're all supposedly going away and shutting down. I don't know how to fix it, but I'm interested to know how far you can actually take it when Congress has specifically allocated resources for tasks. We'll see. I think some of those things are going to end up being quite hard fought, but it's disturbing. Science being taken down from our website is pretty disturbing. I never thought would be here. Never. Not in a million years. Yeah.
I'm from Connecticut.
Hang on a sec. You're getting a microphone. Connecticut is far away. We can't hear you.
I know. And my voice is soft.
I love Connecticut, by the way.
Well, you have experience there.
I do.
And my big concern is that I come from a nice town called Simsbury there. And when I went to the zoning board, I found that they would pass a building going through the zoning board. It would go for both the planning session and appropriate building for this particular site. Mm-hmm. But there was no one to say, thou shalt build, leads, thou shalt build.
Yeah.
And particularly when you get to public housing.
Yeah.
Now, to me, where we can save an awful lot of money is if we put our money into public housing and we build solar sustainable public housing. But because there are no rules, everything that when we built our home in '76 is still being built in 2017 the same way, pretty much. And when they're putting in affordable housing, it's the same way it was built 30 years ago.
I get your point.
Okay. So you were in there with the DEP in Connecticut. I have just stepped into this arena this past year, and I was appalled. So you might have some comments on that, please? And thank you so much for your passion.
Well, the only thing I will tell you is Connecticut is not unique. You know, there are some things and decisions that are relegated to the local level. In fact, that's where all decisions were at one time until they got elevated up. And there's no way that local communities are going to want to give decisions like that to any federal government. It's just, no, I don't see that. But here's what I will tell you, and this is something I didn't mention, is one of the reasons why I really love President Obama is that when he characterized climate as a broad issue, you know, that impacted a lot, he created something called the Climate Cabinet, where we used to have to get together as everybody with the exclusive discussion of climate. And he demanded that every single one of those agencies actually look at what they were doing, that they could do to move forward the agenda of addressing climate change. And it included housing and urban development. So his goal to them was, how do you do exactly what you're saying? How do you build public housing that is efficient and that takes advantage of renewables? How do you incent that? Now, I am not telling you that we made great progress in that regard, but the federal government can do things that incent good environmental performance and good efficiency. And so there is an opportunity, and would have had more opportunity today had the election been different, to actually pursue those goals. I'll give you a very quick example. I got really annoyed at the radon program that we had at EPA, because believe it or not, there are still 22,000 people that die every year of radon exposure from lung cancer. Now, no one should believe that. I can't believe it. It's something we've known since the 70s. Has anyone said the word radon more than 2 times since the 70s? But anyways, it's just so annoying because it's so cheap and easy to fix, to detect, to fix, to build. It's like $150 to build a big house with the right protection so that radon will never be a problem. It's just ridiculous. But I won't dwell too much on that. But we developed they took away our radon grants, which was fine. They just go to state departments of public health who really don't care about them anyways. But what we did was develop a plan to actually work with other agencies to get them to do things, because the United States is a landlord. We mortgage stuff. And if you require radon testing through federal systems, it impacts the banking industry. They see their own liability and they make changes. That's what we did with radon. Is we said if HUD's going to actually have a multi-sector dwelling, they've got to require radon testing before they can actually back up any mortgage there. That's what you have to think about, is if you can't get at something in government directly, you get around it and you figure it out. So we should just think about it. We do it either through incentives for LEED, by giving that extra boost, their own grant program, their labels, anything you can get anybody to do. Or we do it roundabout by seeing how the federal government intervenes and has intervention in these areas and use that leverage. That's the only thing you can do. And again, it's about getting all the agencies involved. If HUD thought that climate landed on their shoulders, they'd have done it a long time ago. And we need to have it on their shoulders. They're part of the challenge.
We do one more?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my name's Kay Sarabell, and I work for the Lung Association, so I'm a guilty member of the last person to the table. And I was wondering if you had...
Actually, you've been the first person to the table on ozone. God bless you. That's up for grabs, too.
Yeah, so we're really active in trying to mobilize the public or the more traditional public health community. And I wonder if you had any ideas or best practices that we should try to push in our position.
Yeah, I mean, you guys do an absolutely wonderful job whenever we're looking at these types of ambient air quality standards to raise the public health concerns. You know, that's why I think this meeting is so important, because there's nobody actually that's trusted more than a doctor, or unless it's a nurse. Nurses are trusted. My daughter's one. I would trust her with anything. But, you know, honestly, people listen to you in a way that others don't. EPA has been very negligent in establishing really strong relations with the medical profession in a way that would allow us to align very effectively, not just when you're looking at a standard, but when you're talking about the environment and exposures to pollution, so that people understand there's more work to be done even though you can't see it. And so we should, you know, if there's something that we can do together, but you should really be out there. And the more that we can take the messages that you're developing about what this means to actually traditional responses to health problems and understanding of what we can expect on a larger scale, then you can start getting to the public health community, traditional health community, because they're going to have to be prepared to deal with the health consequences of a changing climate. And it is not just about going to hospitals like they do Boston and elsewhere and say, make sure you put your air conditioning and your heating systems on the 3rd floor if you're close to the ocean. That is not what I mean about responding in the healthcare industry. It's what do I do when I can anticipate a pandemic? Who takes care of those people? What happens with the migration that's going to happen? Should we just pretend we haven't figured it out or don't know? You know, these are the things we have to start preparing for now. This is going to have direct involvement of people who care, directly care for people who are injured or displaced. And we're just totally unprepared for it, I think, right now. But anyways, we will be. Because as I said, it's a long-term battle. I love you guys very much for putting up with me for this long and for inviting me here. You know, it is really a gift to be at Harvard at a time when I'm looking at DC and scratching my head. To be able to be filled with such energy and hopeful people is probably the best insulation I could ever have. And I thank you for that. And I will always forever be grateful, but I'll be watching you and looking over your shoulder, and I'll have my taser ready if you're not moving fast enough. Thanks, everybody.